weekend, Clint Eastwood's latest film, American Sniper, smashed box office records as the highest-grossing film that ever opened in the month of January. But a film glorifying a Marine who killed at least 160 Iraqis has not come without controversy. Joining me now to break it all down is journalist Rania Khalek, who's been following all of this incredibly. Thank you so much for coming on, Rania.
Thanks for having me on.
So can you first briefly explain who Chris Kyle is and why Clint Eastwood decided to make a movie about him?
So Chris Kyle's actually a Navy SEAL, or was a Navy SEAL, and he wrote a book called American Sniper that ended up being a bestseller. He got a lot of attention for it, and so they made it into a movie. Warner Brothers made it into a movie, and Clint Eastwood is the director, and Clint Eastwood has made several war movies. So this was just kind of like a new one, but this one was surprisingly, I mean, it was very in-your-face propaganda.
Right. Well, that's what was so funny, and thank you for correcting me. I said he was a Marine. He's a SEAL. When I saw the trailer in the movie theater, I actually laughed out loud because it looked like it was just perpetuating this myth of the human shield. The entire trailer was this human shield kind of imagery that's been invoked from Iraq to Palestine. I mean, did you get that sense? You watched it. I feel bad for you. You had to watch the movie.
I mean, so the movie is actually, I mean, it's a good movie in the sense that it's very well produced. If you are just completely ignorant about the Iraq War, then it seems like a great movie, right? But yeah, it's, I mean, there is like a couple moments where there's children around and there is a sort of human shield type type thing going on. But I would say it's actually a little bit worse because what the movie does is almost every single child or woman in the movie, or every Iraqi for that matter, is a terrorist who's like trying to kill US soldiers. And the really creepy part of it is it's almost like it elevates Marines to this level, this like status of civilian, where they're like helpless and Chris Kyle's this godlike figure who has to snipe people down to save him. And then these children or women who like take up arms against the occupier are just portrayed as like irrational, violent savages, as well as the men. In fact, the only time that women and children are victims or innocent is when they're being abused by really scary Arab men. I mean, there's one scene where a child is killed with a drill to the head by a man called the Butcher, who's like trying to teach his father a lesson for being a collaborator with the Americans.
You know, I wanted to read an excerpt from Chris Kyle's book, because when you started posting these, that's when I think things really started to get real here, because when you really realize what a psychopath this guy is. This is just one excerpt. I mean, he says, "My shot saved several Americans whose lives were clearly worth more than this woman's twisted soul. I can stand before God with a clear conscience about doing my job, but I truly, deeply hated the evil that this woman possessed. I hate it to this day. Savage, despicable evil. That's what we were fighting in Iraq." I mean, of course, the movie portrays him as this kind of tortured soul. What other examples of blatant sociopathy did you uncover in his memoir?
So, yeah, he calls them savages throughout his book. Another thing that he does is he blatantly, I mean, he's very openly in the beginning says, like, he loved what he was doing. He loved killing people because they were all savages. They deserved to die. He says the only regret he has is that he only wishes he had killed more. And I mean, there's other things too. Like he says that if he could, he'd kill everybody who was holding a Quran. And there's one part that's, I mean, it makes you giggle because he actually says that he believes that the reason that people are trying to kill American soldiers is because the American soldiers aren't Muslim.
Oh, my brain's about to explode.
Yeah.
I mean, and he even has a passage there about beating animals so hard his hand breaks. I mean, great guy, great job, dude. But you know, what's amazing is this all comes back to kind of his ignorance and his just like tunnel vision of why they're even there. I mean, zero context the film gave about why Al-Qaeda just, you know, it just makes it seem like they just appeared in Iraq, as you pointed out, or why we even were in Iraq in the first place. I mean, talk about that.
So the film is interesting because it doesn't even touch on Iraq except for the Twin Towers fall. He gets married and then he goes to war. So for the poorly informed, which is a lot of Americans when it comes to this war, they would have left with the impression that that Iraq and Saddam Hussein, played a role in 9/11, which is not true. And then Al-Qaeda shows up, and there was a point where Al-Qaeda was in Iraq, right? But it didn't happen until after the U.S. invaded. In fact, it was a direct result of the U.S. invasion and occupation, as is the rise of ISIS. The U.S. invasion and occupation fueled ISIS and destroyed Iraq, and you don't see any of that in the movie. I mean, the U.S. atrocities are just completely erased. What you get instead is this racist atrocity porn, where just Arabs are being mowed down, and sometimes soldiers are killed, but they're humanized before they're killed. So you feel sad. And, I mean, it's a brilliant piece of propaganda.
Yeah, and it worked, right? I mean, it worked. I mean, not only is it just this huge box office hit, the responses to the movie have been actually revolting. People on Twitter declaring that they're ready to kill ragheads after seeing it. I know that you've posted, you had a Storify summary of all of this. And as I understand, you and Max Blumenthal, another journalist, your colleague, have even gotten multiple death threats for simply criticizing the film.
Yeah, so we started criticizing the film when it first it came out in like select theaters on Christmas Day, and we just went on Twitter and we're like, hey, look at the things this guy said. They were really awful. Like, you know, this guy's being turned into a hero in this movie. He lied a lot. I mean, he lied. He claims that he went to New Orleans and shot looters. Shot 30 black looters. Yeah, and nobody could confirm that this happened. And there's other stories like this, where he just blatantly lies. But so we just kind of exposed this racism that's already kind of been documented, and people got really angry. The first, you know, right-wing websites got mad and posted about it, and then we just got this deluge of death threats and rape threats of people saying, like, I hope ISIS rapes you, and other people saying, you know, I'm gonna shoot you. And it's, you know, it's happened again now. I've gotten a few death threats, but this time it's interesting because what I've noticed is that people coming out of the movie, like you said, are like inspired to shoot and kill Arabs and Muslims. It's like they're coming out of this movie, you know, high on patriotism, high on nationalism.
Yeah.
And at this point, like, it's gotten so bad, the Arab American Anti-Discrimination Committee has basically said that they're working with law enforcement to deal with these threats and address them.
This is insane. You know, I can't help but talk about Bradley Cooper, this kind of just ridiculous douchebag. Hollywood heartthrob, been making the rounds on the media claiming that this is a completely apolitical movie. Let's take a listen to him on Jake Tapper.
The spirit of Chris was in you and left you a few weeks.
Well, I mean, not to get too hokey about it, but I mean, it definitely felt like somebody was watching over the whole production of the movie, and I felt, you know, it was a very daunting task to play the legend. I actually felt like Chris was right next to me the whole time. I really did, and everybody, I never felt anyone ever sort of treat me in a way that I wasn't Chris.
Wow. I mean, he goes on to say, you know, this shouldn't have been about whether or not we should have gone to Iraq, whether the war was worth fighting. How could a movie about a man who killed 160 Iraqis not be about the Iraq War?
I mean, that's a good point. You know, the Iraq War killed at least 500,000 Iraqis. That's a lot of people, and it's completely erased from the movie. But on top of that, something that they keep claiming is it's apolitical. This is about soldiers and about how it's hard for soldiers to deal with war and at home, and it's a pro-soldier movie. If that's the case, this movie basically legitimizes these bombing campaigns that we're involved with in the Middle East, which actually puts soldiers in more danger.
Exactly.
In harm's way. So it does the opposite.
Exactly.
And you mentioned that he's been nominated, right? I don't know if you mentioned that. He's been nominated.
We're out of time. I'm so sorry. I know there's so much more to say. Thank you so much, Rania Kalik, investigative journalist, Dispatches from the Underclass. Really appreciate you coming on.